My husband left for work every morning, but his colleague told me he hadn't worked for 2 years. When I checked my bank account, the balance was $0. I decided to follow him when I saw where he went every day. Good day, dear listeners. It's Diana again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video. And also, let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. People always ask me when exactly I knew. They want a clean answer. A date, a moment, a crack of lightning. But that's not how betrayal works. It creeps. It whispers. It borrows your own voice to tell you everything is fine. My name is Claire Hendricks. I was 38 years old when my life came apart at the seams, and I am the one who had to stitch it back together. For 11 years, Marcus and I had built what most people would call a good life. We had a 3-bedroom house in Marietta, Georgia, cream-colored siding, a porch with a swing I repainted every spring. We had a joint savings account, a shared car insurance policy, a dog named Biscuit who slept at the foot of our bed. I worked as a dental hygienist at a practice downtown. Marcus worked, or so I believed, as a project coordinator at a mid-size logistics firm called Draylock and Associates. He left every morning at 7:45 with a travel mug of coffee and came home between 5:30 and 6. He complained about his boss, Dennis. He talked about spreadsheets. He brought home an occasional client gift, once a bottle of whiskey, once a gift card to Applebee's. He had a work badge on a lanyard. He had business casual clothes that he hung in the closet with the same boring routine every evening. I believed every word of it. Looking back, I can see the signals I chose to explain away. The first one came almost 2 years before everything collapsed. We were supposed to go to my cousin Dana's wedding in Nashville. A Saturday in October, hotel booked, dress bought. 3 days before the trip, Marcus told me he couldn't go. A crisis at work, he said. A shipment problem. Dennis needed all hands on deck. I was disappointed, but I went alone. I told people he was stuck at the office. I believed that too. Then there were the finances. I had always handled the household bills, the mortgage, utilities, Biscuit's vet visits, from my salary. Marcus handled what he called the investment side, meaning he managed our joint savings and a separate account he'd set up for long-term goals. I trusted him with that. He was organized, methodical, the kind of man who kept receipts in a folder. When I occasionally glanced at our joint checking account online, the balance looked reasonable. I never thought to look deeper. There were smaller things. The way he sometimes tensed when his phone buzzed during dinner and flipped it face down in one practiced motion. The Thursday evenings he started staying late at the office, once a month, then twice, then almost every week. The new habit of taking his car to be washed alone on Sunday mornings instead of going together like we used to. I told myself these were the textures of a busy marriage, the small irritations of 2 people sharing a life. The crack came from a stranger. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March. I was leaving the grocery store, 2 bags in each hand, when a man called my name from across the parking lot. I turned. He was about 50, heavy-set, wearing a Patagonia vest. His face was familiar in the way of someone you've met at a party and can't quite place. Claire? Claire Hendricks? Marcus's wife? Yes, I said. He crossed the lot toward me, hand extended. Tom Gallagher. I used to work with Marcus at Draylock. We had dinner together. You and Marcus, me and my wife Linda. Maybe 4 years ago? The Italian place on Peachtree? I remembered then. Of course. Tom. How are you? He smiled, but there was something behind the smile, a careful quality, like a man choosing his words with tweezers. I'm good, good. Listen. He hesitated. How's Marcus doing? I heard he left Draylock. What's he up to these days? The bags were cutting into my palms. I remember that sensation very clearly, the plastic handles pressing into my fingers, because my body registered what my mind hadn't yet processed. He's still at Draylock, I said. Tom's expression shifted, just slightly, a small involuntary recalibration. Oh, he said, I must be mixed up. It's been a while. He laughed, short and unconvincing. Tell him Tom says hi. He walked away. I stood in the parking lot. The sun was flat and white. A woman pushed a cart past me and the wheels rattled on the asphalt, and I just stood there, holding my groceries, thinking, why would Tom be mixed up about something like that? That night, while Marcus watched television on the couch and Biscuit slept between us, I opened my laptop and navigated to our bank's website. Not the joint checking account, the savings account, the one Marcus managed, the one I hadn't looked at in over a year because I trusted him. The balance was $0, not low, not concerning, 0. A single digit in a white field, as clean and final as a period at the end of a sentence. I closed the laptop. I set it on the coffee table. I didn't make a sound. Marcus laughed at something on the TV. Biscuit sighed and stretched. And I sat there in my own living room, in my own home, and understood, quietly, without drama, that I did not know the man sitting 2 feet away from me. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on my side of the bed, listening to Marcus breathe, slow and even, the sleep of a man with nothing on his conscience, or perhaps the sleep of a man who had long since made his peace with what he was doing. And I stared at the ceiling and began to count. The savings account had held $41,000 18 months ago. I knew that number because we had talked, in a moment of optimism after refinancing the mortgage, about how we might use it for a kitchen renovation. Marcus had said, let's let it sit a little longer, let it grow, and I had agreed. I had said, you're right, you handle it. Those words, you handle it, sat in my chest like a stone. I waited until I heard the particular quality of silence that meant Marcus was deeply asleep. Then I slipped out of bed, took my laptop to the kitchen, sat down at the table in the dark, and began to look. The savings account, 0. Drained in 11 separate transfers over 22 months, the last one 6 weeks ago, each transfer to an external account I didn't recognize, routing numbers I'd never seen. I checked the investment account he'd set up 3 years ago for long-term goals. I had to request a password reset to access it because Marcus had always logged in himself. When I finally got in, 0. Closed 4 months ago. I checked the joint checking account more carefully than I ever had. Our household bills were covered, mortgage, utilities, insurance, because my direct deposit went there every 2 weeks. But the balance sat at just under $800. No buffer, no cushion. I had been maintaining this household entirely on my dental hygienist's salary of $52,000 a year. Every dollar Marcus claimed to be depositing had apparently gone somewhere else. I sat in the kitchen for a very long time. What does it feel like to discover that your financial life is a fiction? It doesn't feel like rage. Not at first. It feels like vertigo, like reaching for a wall in the dark and finding nothing there. I had believed we were building something together. I had believed in a shared future. And while I was believing, someone had been quietly emptying it out. I thought about calling my mother. I thought about calling Dana. I did neither. I knew that the moment I said the words out loud, the shape of my life would change permanently, and I wasn't ready for that yet. I needed to think before I spoke to anyone. I needed to know what I was dealing with. Was it possible there was an explanation? I turn this question over with the discipline of someone who doesn't want to be a fool, but also doesn't want to be unjust. Could there be a debt he'd hidden from me? A financial crisis he'd managed alone? People did strange things under pressure. Secrets accrued in marriages for reasons that weren't always malicious. But $41,000, methodically transferred, over almost 2 years, to an account I had no access to or knowledge of, while he continued to leave the house every morning at 7:45 with his travel mug and his work badge, and Tom Gallagher's face in the parking lot, that careful, choosing words with tweezers face. He left Draylock. By 3 in the morning, I had made a decision. I would not confront Marcus, not yet. Confronting him now, with no information beyond a bank statement and a parking lot conversation, would only give him time to prepare, to construct a story, to move assets I didn't know about, to lawyer up before I had so much as consulted one myself. I had watched enough of my divorced friends go through the aftermath of blind confrontations to know how badly it could go when the unprepared party made the first move. I needed evidence, I needed information, and I needed to get it quietly. I made a list. On a legal pad I found in the kitchen drawer with a pen that barely worked, pressing hard enough to leave an impression in the paper beneath. I wrote in small, controlled letters, as though the act of writing neatly could impose order on what I was feeling. 1. Verify employment status, Draylock and Associates. 2. Find out where the money went. Consult a financial forensics professional or a divorce attorney. 3. Document his daily movements. 4. Open a personal bank account in my name only. Transfer my next paycheck there. 5. Consult a family law attorney ASAP. 5 steps. Clear, sequential, doable. I was not a woman who fell apart. I had grown up in a house where falling apart was not an option. Single mother, 2 younger sisters, a county where pride meant you handled things. And that upbringing was somewhere in my bones. I could feel it now, rising like bedrock. Before Marcus's alarm went off at 6:30, I folded the legal pad, tucked it inside a copy of a novel on my nightstand, and got back into bed. When he leaned over to kiss my cheek before leaving, I kept my eyes closed and my breathing slow. I listened to the front door close. I listened to his car back out of the driveway. Then I opened my eyes, looked at the ceiling, and thought, starting today, I follow the truth wherever it leads, no matter what I find. I had no idea yet how far it would take me. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. I sat in my car in the driveway after Marcus left, engine running, and called Draylock and Associates directly. I found the number on their public website. A real company, I confirmed that much. A woman answered on the 3rd ring. Draylock and Associates, how can I direct your call? I had rehearsed this. Hi, I'm calling from the Benefits Department of Anthem Insurance. I need to verify current employment for a Marcus Hendricks, Hendricks. Date of birth, July 14th, 1983. A pause. Keyboard clicks. I'm showing a Marcus Hendricks who was terminated from Draylock in May of 2023. He's not a current employee. May 2023. 22 months ago. Thank you, I said. That's all I needed. I hung up. I sat in the car. The garage door was still open, and I could see a robin pulling at something in the front lawn with complete, focused indifference to everything I was feeling. 22 months. Every morning for 22 months, Marcus had gotten dressed, made coffee, driven away, and come home. He had complained about Dennis. He had mentioned spreadsheets. He had worn his lanyard with the work badge on it, a badge that, I now realized, was either expired or fabricated, and I had never once thought to look at it closely. I drove to the offices of Hargrove Family Law on North Marietta Parkway. I had found the name the night before, a woman-led firm with strong reviews on divorce cases involving hidden assets. I had not told anyone I was going. I had told Marcus, via text, that I was running errands after my appointment. The attorney who saw me was named Sandra Okafor. She was 50, direct, and had the particular composure of someone who had heard every variation of every story. I sat across from her desk and told her everything: the bank account, Tom Gallagher, the phone call to Draylock. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she folded her hands. "What you're describing," she said carefully, "is potentially both marital fraud and financial abuse. The transfers to an external account could constitute dissipation of marital assets, which is actionable in Georgia. The first thing we need is a full financial picture. All accounts, all transfers, all assets." She referred me to a forensic accountant named Phil Trask, who worked with her firm regularly. She also told me something I had already concluded on my own: do not tip your hand. Not yet. "People in this situation often panic and confront," she said. "That's understandable. It's also frequently a mistake. The moment he knows you know, assets can move. Evidence can be explained away. Get the documentation first." I left her office with a folder of intake paperwork and a retainer fee that I paid from the small personal account I opened that same afternoon at a Wells Fargo branch 2 towns over. Funded with the cash advance I'd taken from my own credit card, the one in my name only, which I had never added Marcus to, and which had a $4,000 limit I had never touched. That turned out to be one of the luckiest pieces of oversight in my marriage. On the 3rd day, I followed him. I told myself I would do it once, just to confirm a general direction. I took a personal day, left the house 30 minutes before he did, and parked 2 streets over. When his car passed, I pulled out behind him at a safe distance. He drove with complete confidence. No checking mirrors, no unnecessary turns. He had been doing this for a long time. He drove 23 minutes north on 75, then took an exit toward a commercial strip in Kennesaw. He pulled into the parking lot of a small business complex, the kind with a dozen suite numbers and a directory sign by the entrance. He parked. He got out in his chinos and blue button-down, his lanyard swinging, his travel mug in hand, and he walked with purpose toward a unit at the end of the row. Suite 114. The glass on the door was frosted. There was a small decal, Cornerstone Financial Advisory Group. I wrote it down. I photographed the sign with my phone, the parking lot, his car in the frame. Then I drove home, hands steady on the wheel, and called Phil Trask. "I have a name," I said. "Cornerstone Financial Advisory Group, Kennesaw, Georgia." There was a brief silence on his end. Then, "I'll start pulling public records today. Can you get me access to the joint accounts by end of week?" "Yes." "Mrs. Hendricks," Phil said, "I want to prepare you for something. In cases like this, the financial picture usually turns out to be more complicated than the client initially realizes. Not always worse, but more complicated." "I understand," I said. But I didn't. Not yet. Because what I hadn't considered, what I was still too stunned to anticipate, was that Marcus wasn't doing this alone. That same evening, as I set the dinner table and pretended that nothing had changed, Marcus took a phone call in the backyard. Through the kitchen window, I watched him pace the small rectangle of grass, speaking low and quickly, his free hand cutting the air in the way he did when he was explaining something with great urgency. He hung up and came inside. He said the call had been from Dennis. Dennis, from the company that had fired him 22 months ago. I nodded and said, "Everything okay?" "Just work stuff," he said, and smiled and sat down to the dinner I had made. I smiled back, and I thought, someone just told you something, and now you know I've been asking questions. The clock had started. Phil Trask called me 4 days later. I was in the parking lot of my dental practice, sitting in my car on my lunch break, eating nothing, just waiting. When his name appeared on my screen, I answered before the second ring. "I have preliminary findings," he said. "Some of what I found is what you expected. Some of it is going to require you to sit down." I was already sitting down. "Tell me." Cornerstone Financial Advisory Group was not a registered investment firm. It had no license with FINRA, no SEC registration, no state certification in Georgia. It was a limited liability company registered 18 months ago under the name of a woman named Renata Voss. The address was the suite in Kennesaw where I had watched Marcus walk with his travel mug and his lanyard. Renata Voss, 41 years old, previously a licensed insurance agent whose license had lapsed. She and Marcus had met, Phil confirmed through social media cross-referencing and a business filing approximately 2 years ago. The transfers from our savings account, all 11 of them, had gone directly to a business account held by Cornerstone Financial Advisory Group. In other words, to Renata Voss. "Is she his—" I started. "I don't know the nature of the personal relationship," Phil said. "That's outside my scope. What I can tell you is that financially, he has been funding her business operation for almost 2 years. There may also be additional assets. A vehicle registered in his name that doesn't appear on any document you've provided me. A 2022 Audi registered 8 months ago." I didn't own an Audi. Marcus drove our shared Honda Accord. Except apparently he also drove a 2022 Audi that I had never seen. I called Sandra Okafor immediately after. "We had enough," she said. "Enough to file for divorce and petition for emergency asset protection. A motion that would freeze any remaining marital assets and prevent further transfers. She would file the following Monday. What I didn't anticipate was how fast word would travel." On Saturday morning, 2 days before Sandra was set to file, Marcus came home from his Sunday morning car wash routine at 10:15 instead of 11:30. He walked into the kitchen with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not guilt, not apology, something harder. "Sit down, Claire." I sat. My hands were in my lap. My heart was doing something irregular. "I know you've been asking about Draylock," he said. "Someone called HR." I kept my face still. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You called from a blocked number pretending to be an insurance company." He leaned against the counter. "Claire, I know." I looked at him. This man I had shared a bed with for 11 years. This man who had kissed my cheek every morning while our savings account drained to nothing. And I said very quietly, "Then why don't you tell me what I'd find, Marcus, if I sat down and looked at everything?" The hardness in his face shifted. Something moved behind his eyes. Calculation, reassessment. "I can explain all of it," he said. "There were investments that didn't perform. I didn't want to stress you out. I was going to fix it." Before I could respond, his phone rang. He glanced at it and I saw, in the half second before he controlled his expression, a flash of something close to relief. He answered it, stepped out of the kitchen, and I heard his voice drop. He came back 3 minutes later. "I think we should talk to someone together, a counselor, a mediator, before you do anything." He paused, choosing words. "Before you do anything you can't take back. Before you do anything you can't take back." It was a warning dressed as concern, and behind it, I understood, was someone coaching him. The next morning, he left the house early. At 9:15, there was a knock at my front door. When I opened it, a woman was standing on my porch. She was wearing a cream blazer, her hair blown out, sunglasses on even in the shade of the overhang. She smiled the way people smile when they want you to know they are not afraid of you. "Hi, Claire," she said. "I'm Renata. I think it's time we talked, just the two of us." I felt the blood in my body rearrange itself. This was the woman my husband had given $41,000 to. She was standing on my porch. She had used my first name. "I don't think we have anything to talk about," I said. She tilted her head. "Marcus made some promises he can't keep if this becomes a legal situation. To both of us, honestly. If you file for divorce and start making claims about missing money..." She let the sentence trail, and the trailing was the threat. "It gets very messy for everyone. Investigations, publicity. Your name gets attached to all of it. Do you really want that?" Publicity. She was threatening me with the fallout of exposing the crime committed against me. "I think you should leave my property," I said. Her smile didn't move. "Think about it, Claire. I'm trying to help you." I closed the door. I locked it. I stood in the hallway with my back against the door and my eyes closed for 30 seconds. Then I called Sandra Okafor. "File Monday morning," I said. "File everything." Sandra filed. The emergency asset freeze was granted by Tuesday afternoon. That week, after the papers were served and Marcus had packed a bag and left for somewhere he didn't tell me, I drove to my mother's house in Cartersville. I sat on her back porch and drank iced tea and let her ask me everything, and answered slowly and completely. I stayed for 4 days. I slept 10 hours a night. I let Biscuit sleep on the bed. I did not check my email or my bank account or the news. I gave myself those 4 days deliberately, like a prescription, because I knew what was still coming and I needed to be whole enough to face it. When I came back from my mother's, the house felt different, not emptier. Marcus had taken very little, just 2 bags, and his absence was more of a pressure removed than a presence lost. The house felt more like mine than it had in years. I moved Biscuit's bed to the living room, where he'd always wanted to sleep. I put a new coffee maker on the counter because I had always hated the French press Marcus insisted on. Small reclamations. They mattered. I went back to work on Thursday. My colleagues at the dental practice were kind in the way people are when they know something is wrong and have decided to give you space. My office manager, Patricia, left a casserole dish on my desk with a note that just said, "We're here." I ate lunch in my car for the first week, not from sadness, but because I needed the silence, the controlled space, the 45 minutes of no one asking me anything. On the 9th day after the filing, Marcus texted me, "I know things are bad right now. I want you to know I'm not angry. I understand why you did what you did. I think we could still figure this out together if you were willing to pause the legal process and just talk." I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to Sandra. She called me an hour later. "Don't respond. This is a documented attempt to interrupt proceedings. He may also be trying to establish a paper trail suggesting you were open to reconciliation, which could complicate the asset dissipation claim." "I won't respond," I said. "Good. We have a deposition scheduled for Renata Voss in 3 weeks. Phil has pulled the business accounts. The picture is getting clearer." The picture, as it turned out, was this. Cornerstone Financial Advisory Group had never had a single legitimate client other than Marcus. Its only income had been the transfers from our joint savings account. Renata had used the money to fund her own living expenses, an apartment in Midtown Atlanta, the Audi that was technically registered to Marcus, several international trips that appeared on her social media as business development. The entire operation was, in Phil's careful language, an entity of questionable financial legitimacy that bore significant hallmarks of a fraudulent enterprise. In plain language, My husband had been funding his girlfriend's lifestyle for nearly 2 years while I paid the mortgage and believed he was going to work. The cold calm I felt during this period surprised me. I had expected anger. I'd felt it, still felt it in flashes. But what settled over me in those weeks was something quieter and more durable. A kind of clarity that came from knowing exactly what had happened and exactly what I was going to do about it. Renata tried once more. Not at my door this time. She was smarter than that after Sandra sent a letter advising against contact. But through a mutual acquaintance, a woman named Justine, who ran a spin class I attended and who, I learned, knew Renata socially. Justine called me one afternoon with an odd, stilted quality to her voice, like she was reading from something. "Hey, Claire, I don't want to overstep, but Renata mentioned she reached out to you and she feels like there was a misunderstanding. She wanted me to let you know she's really not trying to make your life harder. She thinks maybe if you two could just have coffee." "Justine," I said pleasantly, "I appreciate the call. I can't have any contact with her right now for legal reasons. Please don't put yourself in the middle of this again." A pause. "Of course. I'm sorry." I didn't go back to that spin class. I wasn't angry at Justine. She was a person who had been used and probably didn't fully understand it. But I noted the attempt carefully, noted it in the log Sandra had told me to keep of all contacts, direct or indirect, related to the case. The social support I needed didn't come from where I expected, not from my colleagues or my spin class or even entirely from my mother, who was wonderful but who sometimes confused supporting me with catastrophizing on my behalf. It came from 2 places. The first was Dana, my cousin from Nashville, who drove down one Saturday and sat across from me at my kitchen table for 6 hours and did something no one else had done. She asked me what I needed, specifically, not what she assumed I needed, and then she did those specific things. She helped me organize a binder of financial documents. She sat with me while I called the credit bureaus to put a fraud alert on my name. She made me eat actual dinner. The second was a support group I found through Sandra's referral, a weekly meeting for women navigating financial abuse in marriages. I went once expecting to feel out of place. I went back every week for the following 2 months. There were women there who had lost far more than I had. Women who had been in situations far more dangerous. Something about being in that room, that circle of folding chairs in a church basement in Smyrna, Georgia, anchored me in a way I hadn't known I needed. I was not the only one. I was not uniquely foolish. I was not defined by what had been done to me. I left each meeting walking a little straighter. Meanwhile, Marcus and Renata went quiet. No more texts. No more emissaries. Sandra told me this was typical. When the legal machinery began moving in earnest, people tended to either lawyer up or, in cases like this one, begin to scramble. They were scrambling. I could feel it, even from a distance. I had something they didn't. Time I was spending building a case, and patience I had earned through 4 days of iced tea and 10 hours of sleep. They were about to find out exactly what that was worth. 3 weeks before the deposition, Marcus asked if he could come by to pick up some papers from the home office. Through Sandra, I agreed, on the condition that he come during the day, that I was present, and that the visit lasted no longer than 30 minutes. I wasn't required to be hospitable. I was required to be documented. He arrived on a Wednesday at 2 o'clock. He looked thinner. His shirt was wrinkled in a way Marcus's shirts never were. He'd always been meticulous about that. Pressed collars, no visible creases. The thin look and the wrinkled shirt told me that wherever he was staying, things were not comfortable. I noted this without satisfaction and without pity. I stood in the doorway to the home office and watched him go through the filing cabinet. Biscuit ignored him completely, which I thought was accurate. When he'd found what he came for, a folder of personal tax documents, he turned to face me. His expression had been rehearsed. I could see the rehearsal in it the way you see a stage set from the wrong angle and notice the scaffolding. "Claire," he said, "I know what I did was wrong. I know I have no right to ask you for anything. But I want you to know," he paused for the effect of sincerity, "that what was between me and Renata is over. It's been over for months. She wasn't who I thought she was. She manipulated me too. I was in a bad place after I lost the job, and I made terrible decisions, and she took advantage of that." I looked at him. "Marcus, anything you want to say to me should go through Sandra. I'm not talking about the case. I'm talking about us. There is no us outside the case right now." He set the folder down on the desk. He looked at the floor, then back at me. "If you drop the dissipation claim and agree to a standard division of remaining assets, I can pay back half of what's gone within 18 months. I have a plan. I have a potential consulting position lined up and—" "Stop," I said. "Marcus, stop." He did. "You need to leave now." He picked up the folder. He walked to the front door. And then, hand on the door, he said something that dropped the mask entirely. "You should think very carefully about pushing this as far as you're planning to. There are details about our finances over the years, some of them involving your family, that could complicate things in ways that wouldn't be comfortable for anyone." I stared at him. My family. He was referencing a small amount of money my mother had lent us 6 years ago for a roof repair, which we had paid back in full. There was nothing complicated about it, but the implication, "I can make things messy for you and your mother," was unmistakable. "Thank you for picking up your papers," I said. "Please make sure all future communication goes through your attorney." He left. I called Sandra from the kitchen, standing very still, and told her what he'd said verbatim. I had the text of it nearly memorized. When you know a conversation might matter later, you listen differently. "I'm recording this," Sandra said. "That comment about your family is close to the line of witness intimidation. If he makes anything like that explicit in writing or in front of witnesses, we need to know immediately." That evening, my phone showed 3 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize. On the third voicemail, a woman's voice, Renata's, I recognized it from my doorstep, said, "Claire, I know you don't want to hear from me, and I know I'm not supposed to reach out, but I'm asking you, woman to woman, to think about what a full investigation is going to do to both of us. My business is already being looked at. My reputation is gone. What more do you need? You're going to get the house. You'll get a settlement. Is it worth destroying 2 other people's lives completely just to get the last word?" I listened to the message twice. Then I saved it, clipped the timestamp, and forwarded it to Sandra with the subject line, "Third contact attempt. Voicemail. See attached." I sat at the kitchen table after that. I won't pretend there was no fear. There was. Not the sharp, immediate fear of a threat in the room, more a cold background hum, the recognition that these 2 people were still willing to reach into my life, still willing to push, still believed they could find a lever that would make me stop. The fear lasted about 20 minutes. Then it hardened into something else. Not rage. Rage is hot and directionless. This was colder, more specific. I thought of the $41,000. I thought of 22 months of morning coffee and lanyards and fake complaints about Dennis. I thought of Renata Voss standing on my porch with her sunglasses on, smiling, telling me she was trying to help me. I opened my email. I wrote a short note to Phil Trask asking for a status update on the full forensic report. Then I wrote a note to Sandra. I want to proceed with everything, full scope, no reductions in the claim. Then I closed my laptop, put Biscuit's leash on, and took him for a long walk around the neighborhood in the early dark, in the spring air, in my town, on my street. I was not going to stop. The deposition took place on a Thursday morning in early May in a conference room at Sandra's firm on the 4th floor of a glass building on Peachtree Street. I had been deposed myself the week before. 2.5 hours of questions from Marcus's attorney, a man named Gerald Foss, who specialized in the kind of patient, circling cross-examination designed to make you feel that every certain thing you knew was actually uncertain. I had answered everything calmly and completely. Sandra had prepared me so thoroughly that I felt almost bored by the process, which I understood was the goal. Today, I was there to observe. I was entitled to attend as a party to the divorce proceedings. I sat against the wall with Sandra beside me and a legal pad on the table in front of me, and I watched Renata Voss walk in and take her seat across from the court reporter. She had hired her own attorney, a young man in an expensive suit who looked like he was trying to project confidence and not quite managing it. Renata herself looked composed. Cream blazer again, I noted. Hair perfect. She sat with her hands folded on the table. Phil Trask presented his findings first, submitted as a forensic accounting report, 94 pages entered into evidence. He walked through the transfers, the account timelines, the business entity registration, the social media documentation of Renata's expenditures cross-referenced against the transfer dates. Then Sandra began. The deposition had a rhythm. Careful, methodical, like watching someone dismantle something complicated piece by piece. Sandra asked about the transfers. Renata said they were loans. Sandra asked for the loan agreements. Renata said they had been verbal. Sandra produced 3 years of Renata's tax returns, showing no declared income aside from a marginal amount from the lapsed insurance business, and asked how she had funded the lease on her Midtown apartment. Renata said she had personal savings. Sandra asked for bank records predating the transfers, showing those savings. Renata's attorney objected. The objection was noted. Sandra moved on. Marcus was deposed in the afternoon. He arrived looking more composed than he had at the house. Gerald Foss had clearly done his work. But there is a particular quality to prepared composure, a tightness around the eyes, a slight delay before answers, and Marcus had it. Sandra asked him to describe his employment between May 2023 and the present. He said he had left Draylock voluntarily to pursue consulting opportunities. Sandra asked him to name one client he had billed in that period. He named a company. Phil had already pulled records showing no entity. By that name had any registered contracts or incorporation documents in Georgia. Sandra presented this. Gerald Foss objected on relevance grounds. The objection failed. Then Sandra showed Marcus the transfer records. 11 transfers. She asked him to confirm that each transfer represented a movement of marital assets to an account controlled by Renata Voss. He said they were investments. She asked him to produce any investment documentation, a contract, a prospectus, a return statement, any document at all, showing a return on any of the 11 transfers. He looked at Gerald Foss. Gerald Foss made a note. "Mr. Hendricks," Sandra said with the pleasant steadiness of someone who has done this many hundreds of times, "is it accurate that you transferred $41,400 of joint marital assets to an account controlled by Renata Voss over a period of 22 months while representing to your wife that you were employed full-time and that the savings account remained intact?" A very long pause. "It's more complicated than that," Marcus said. "I understand. Is the answer yes or no?" Another pause. Gerald Foss touched his arm. Marcus looked at the table. "Yes," he said. It was a small word in a small room, but I felt it land like something physical. Then came the moment I hadn't anticipated. Sandra had one more document. Something Phil had found in his deeper pull of the Cornerstone business account. A transfer I hadn't known about. 4 months ago, 2 weeks after the emergency asset freeze had been granted by the court, Marcus had attempted a transfer of $15,000 from an account that had not appeared in any of his prior financial disclosures. A separate personal account he had maintained throughout the marriage, never declared, never shared. The freeze had blocked the transfer, but the attempt was documented. The account had not been disclosed. "Mr. Hendricks," Sandra said, "can you explain the existence of account ending in 7741 at SunTrust Bank?" The composure cracked. Not dramatically. Marcus didn't raise his voice or leave the room, but his jaw tightened in a specific way, and I watched him look at Gerald Foss with something that was not quite panic and not quite fury, but existed in the territory between them. And Gerald Foss looked back at him with the expression of a man who had not been told about this account. There was a 20-minute recess. I sat in the conference room hallway with Sandra and a cup of water and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. When we reconvened, Marcus's attorney requested a 30-day extension on financial disclosures to allow for a more complete review of documentation. Sandra agreed pleasantly because the extension didn't matter anymore. We had what we needed. On the drive home, Sandra said, "The undisclosed account changes the calculus entirely. In Georgia, hiding an asset during divorce proceedings is contempt of court. It also directly supports the dissipation claim. Gerald Foss is going to be calling you with a settlement offer within 2 weeks. I'd be very surprised if he doesn't." She was right. He called in 9 days. The settlement offer came on a Tuesday, written through Gerald Foss's office. I read it sitting at my kitchen table with Sandra on the phone. It offered me the house outright, the full balance of the undisclosed SunTrust account, and a structured repayment of half the dissipated savings. $20,000 paid over 36 months, in exchange for dropping any criminal referral to the Cobb County District Attorney's Office regarding the financial fraud. I listened to Sandra read it. I looked out the kitchen window at the backyard. The swing on the porch moved slightly in the wind. "What's your read?" I asked. "It's a significant offer," Sandra said. "The house alone represents approximately $210,000 in equity. The SunTrust account has $11,000 in it, and the 36-month repayment is enforceable through the settlement agreement." "What are we leaving on the table if I take it?" "The possibility of a criminal referral on the dissipation and potentially on Cornerstone, if the DA determined there were criminal elements to that enterprise. Criminal proceedings, if pursued, could theoretically result in restitution orders. But they're slower, uncertain, and emotionally taxing. There's also the question of Renata Voss. Her exposure in a criminal matter would be hers to navigate, not yours." I thought about it for 36 hours. I talked to Dana. I talked to my mother. I sat with my own thoughts on the back porch in the evening with Biscuit's head in my lap. What I wanted, what I had always wanted, from the moment I sat in my dark kitchen looking at a zero balance, was not punishment. I wanted truth on the record, and I wanted my life back. I wanted the house where I had repainted the porch swing every spring. I wanted the financial stability that had been stolen from me returned as completely as possible. I wanted Marcus to face a documented reckoning that could not be minimized or explained away. The settlement gave me all of that. The criminal question was different. I thought hard about it. If Marcus and Renata had done to other people what they had done to me, if Cornerstone had any other victims beyond the one wife, then a DA referral was a different moral calculation. I asked Phil Trask, who told me that based on the financial records he'd examined, Cornerstone appeared to have had no clients other than Marcus himself. It was not, in his professional judgment, an enterprise that had defrauded the general public. It was a private financial arrangement between a man and a woman that had been funded by the man's wife without her knowledge. That distinction mattered to me. I accepted the settlement, on my terms, with 2 additions that Sandra negotiated back into the agreement. Marcus would sign a sworn financial affidavit confirming all previously undisclosed assets, with a penalty clause of $50,000 if any subsequent assets were discovered, and a mutual non-disparagement clause that was, in practice, more protective of me than of him, because I had nothing to hide and he had a great deal. The divorce was finalized on a Friday morning in late June. I sat in the courtroom in a blue dress I had bought specifically for that day, not to look good for anyone, but because I had decided that I would mark the occasion with intention rather than dread. Sandra sat beside me. The proceeding lasted 27 minutes. The judge signed the order. Marcus sat across the courtroom with Gerald Foss. He didn't look at me when he came in. He didn't look at me when he left. That was fine. I had not come there for him to look at me. Outside the courthouse, Sandra shook my hand and then, deviating from professional standard, hugged me briefly. "You are the clearest client I've had in a long time," she said. "You stayed the course." I drove home. I parked in the driveway of my house. My house, as of 27 minutes ago, no mortgage pending reassessment, mine outright. And I sat in the car for a moment and let it be true. Then I went inside and fed the dog. The weeks that followed had their own texture of adjustment. I changed the locks, which Sandra had advised me to do months earlier and which I had finally done. I repainted the porch swing, not because it needed it, but because I wanted to do it this year, in this new version of my life. I met with a personal financial advisor, a woman named Cynthia, at a fee-only firm, and I sat down for the first time with full visibility of what I had and what I was building on my terms without delegation. Marcus's repayment schedule held for the first few months because the penalty clause made default expensive. I had been prepared for it not to. Sandra had warned me that enforcing a payment schedule required vigilance, but the first 3 monthly transfers arrived on time. I put each one directly into the new savings account. Phil Trask's report became, in a quiet way, a document with longer reach. Sandra shared the forensic findings with Renata's insurance regulatory board, with whom she had a pre-existing professional relationship. A review of Renata's prior activities as a licensed insurance agent, which had not been part of my case but which the report had surfaced indirectly, was opened independently. That was not my doing. It was the natural consequence of documented truth. And consequences, I had learned, have their own momentum. By September, I had started to sleep through the night again. That sounds like a small thing. It wasn't. For almost a year, from the March evening, I opened the laptop and found the zero. Through the filing, the depositions, the final decree, I had woken at some point in the early dark, heart going, mind running through documents and timelines and what-ifs. The first full night of unbroken sleep came on a Friday in September, and I woke Saturday morning feeling the difference the way you feel the absence of a chronic pain you had stopped noticing was there. Life reorganized itself around honest foundations. I received a small raise at the dental practice. I started putting $400 a month into the new savings account. By December, it held $3,200, which was not $41,000, but it was mine, and every dollar in it was accounted for, and that made it more valuable than the number suggested. I took a long weekend in October and drove up to the Blue Ridge Mountains with Dana. We stayed in a cabin, hiked, cooked dinner, and talked until late. On the second morning, standing on a trail looking out at a valley going gold with autumn, I thought, I am 40 years old, and I have my house, and my dog, and my cousin, and my job, and I know exactly where every dollar I own is. It was a quiet, steady thought. It felt like bedrock. The women in my support group continued to gather on Thursday evenings. I stayed. I became, without exactly intending to, one of the people who had been there longer, who could speak from the other side of the acute phase. I was not recovered in the way of someone who forgets. I was recovered in the way of someone who integrates. Marcus's story, as it reached me in pieces through mutual acquaintances, was not a story of triumph. The consulting position ended after 2 months. By fall, he had moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Smyrna, a visible reduction from the life he had exited. He kept up the monthly payments on schedule. I chose to interpret this not as character, but as math. The penalty clause was clear, and he understood it. Renata Voss had a harder landing. The regulatory board review of her insurance history surfaced a prior disciplinary matter in another state. A pattern of client funds mismanagement settled quietly and sealed years ago. The new review cracked that seal. Enough was documented and searchable that anyone who Googled her name found a license revocation and a consent order on the second page of results. Her Midtown apartment lease ended in the summer. She relocated somewhere people described vaguely as out of state. I did not follow her life with any vigilance. I had not set out to ruin anyone. I had set out to find the truth and protect what was mine. The consequences that followed were not mine to engineer. They were simply what happened when accountability met documentation. On a Tuesday evening in November, I repainted the porch swing, a different color this time, a deep, quiet blue that changed character in different light. I did it slowly in the cooling afternoon, with Biscuit sleeping on the boards beside me. When I finished, I sat on the swing and watched the neighborhood go through its early evening routines. My house, my street, my evening. I had not known, the night I sat in the dark looking at a 0, whether I was strong enough, clear-headed enough, patient enough. But I had taken the list I made at 3 in the morning and followed it, step by careful step. It had led me here. And here was more than enough. What would you have done, sitting in that dark kitchen, looking at a 0? If this story reached you, if any part of it felt true, leave a